Newton's first law will make you rich and successful. Let me explain to you why. Now, Newton's first law states that any object that stays in motion will stay in motion unless there's an external force that acts on it and it will propel perhaps forward. Now, before you guys click off because I told you guys about a very cliche and classical example of physics, let me explain. Now, you guys have probably had that feeling where, you had an amazing streak and after the 5th time going to the gym, for example, you suddenly stop. And then after you stop, you have the tendency to not start again. And now that's a very classical example of inertia, because inertia states that, as I mentioned earlier, anything that remains in a simple state won't move unless something else happens. Now, the fundamental opposite of inertia is actually momentum. And so I want you guys to understand that you can see inertia as a sense of motivation. Now, the start is the hardest, right? And that's a very cliche saying, and it's true not only in physics, but also basically in anything you do in your life. Now, if you have, for example, the objective of you want to start a business or you want to be successful in your 9 to 5, then you understand that the bigger a specific change is, or the bigger your goal is, right? Let's make it goal. The more energy it requires to move forward. And so that in return means the more belief systems, the more activities, the more behaviors, and the more consistency that you require. Because in physics, inertia stands for that the bigger the mass, the more power it needs to actually move forward. But the moment it starts moving, something known as the snowball effect, there's something called momentum. And so with momentum, in other words, it's easier to continue something that has already been started. Now, for that same example, what we mentioned earlier with the gym, now if you've went 3 or 4 times consistently every single day, you find it much more easier and much more simpler to actually go on the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th day. And so with that simple principle of inertia, I want you guys to not only understand that the start is the hardest, but the moment you have started, with momentum, consistency is much more simpler, and with consistency, you are just much more likely of actually achieving your goal. Bye.